Beyond the Gates spoilers tease that the sleepy perfection of Fairmont Crest was never built to withstand an earthquake. But sometimes, the most devastating tremors are the ones that come in human form. For years, Chelsea had lived in the quiet assurance that her past had been neatly buried, sealed away beneath layers of good deeds, social influence, and the glossy facade of the Fairmont Crest elite. Alison had vanished without a Tricino farewell, no gossip, not even the faintest echo of explanation, just an absence so complete it felt like erasure. In the vacuum she left behind, Chelsea flourished, her confidence sharpening into authority, her position in the community cemented like marble. Fairmont Crest was the sort of place where status wasn't just inherited, it was cultivated, pruned, and guarded. Chelsea had become its most meticulous gardener. Every committee, every charity gala, every carefully managed photo in the society pages reinforced her control. People didn't just admire her, they deferred to her. And somewhere along the way, she had convinced herself that Alison's disappearance was permanent, that the shared history between them was a chapter ripped out of a book no one would ever read again. But that belief shattered in a single morning. It was a Monday, which meant Chelsea's schedule was predictable. A breakfast meeting with the Heritage Preservation Board, an hour at her design studio to review the week's projects, then an afternoon site visit to the new Community Arts Center. She was mid-sentence in a presentation about restoring the Bellwether Fountain when she noticed the Ripley subtle, contagious whisper threading through the room. Eyes, darting at first, began to fix in a single direction. Chelsea followed them instinctively. The double doors at the far end of the room swung open. There she was. Alison. She stood framed in the doorway as if she had been waiting for the perfect moment to make her entrance. The green satin of her dress caught the morning light in shifting tones, emerald, forest, almost black in the folds. It was the kind of dress that said, "I am here, and I will be noticed." Her hair, perfectly arranged yet deceptively casual, grazed her collarbone. The smile on her lips was small, precise, and unreadable, warm enough to be polite, sharp enough to cut. Chelsea felt her heartbeat stumble. For a brief, disorienting moment, she thought the years had folded in on themselves, bringing her face to face with a version of her life she had worked very hard to forget. But Alison's presence wasn't some nostalgic apparition, it was a deliberate, calculated re-entry. And that was infinitely worse. What struck Chelsea hardest wasn't the shock of seeing her again, it was the immediate, instinctive understanding that Alison knew. Still knew. Knew about the stolen hours, the whispered confessions, the lines they'd crossed when Craig was still her husband. Knew about the promises they'd made to each other in shadows, only to abandon them when reality intruded. Knew the secrets they had buried with ruthless precision. The real danger wasn't gossip. It was that Alison had never been afraid to take risks, even dangerous ones. And when Alison took risks, people got hurt. Chelsea swallowed hard, forcing herself to maintain composure as Alison crossed the room with unhurried grace, exchanging greetings as if she'd been away on nothing more than an extended vacation. There was no confrontation, no immediate attack. Just presence. And presence, Chelsea knew, could be a weapon. The first strike wasn't loud, it came in the form of a small, square package left at Chelsea's front gate 3 days later. Wrapped in black tissue paper, no card, no return address. Inside, a vintage silver locket. Chelsea's breath caught when she saw it. The locket had once belonged to Alison's grandmother, but that wasn't why it was terrifying. Inside was a photo, grainy, slightly blurred, but unmistakable, off the two of them together at a lake house party long ago, sitting closer than friends should, their laughter frozen in the frame. Chelsea hadn't even known the photo existed. She told herself it was nothing. A strange but harmless gesture. But the gestures multiplied. A note, written in Alison's distinctive looping script, tucked inside the program at a charity auction Chelsea was hosting. "We should catch up soon. There's so much unfinished business." A bottle of Chelsea's favorite perfume, one she hadn't worn in years, appearing on her desk at the studio without explanation. No one ever saw Alison deliver these things, but everyone saw the moments she chose to appear. She began showing up at events Chelsea considered her territory: the hospital fundraiser, the quarterly art fair, even the members-only wine tastings. She never caused a scene, but her presence was a scene. People noticed. People remembered. And every time their paths crossed, Alison offered the same familiar smile that somehow managed to be both inviting and challenging. The pressure mounted when Alison befriended Madison. Madison was younger, vibrant, and unafraid to speak her mind, a refreshing change for Chelsea, who had grown used to relationships that were more strategic than sincere. Madison wasn't part of the old Fairmont Crest elite, which made her all the more appealing. She hadn't been tainted by the rigid hierarchy. But Madison was curious, especially about Chelsea's past, a subject Chelsea preferred to keep locked away. Alison seemed to sense this immediately. It started innocently enough. Alison struck up a conversation with Madison at a local gallery opening, charming her with stories about the art scene in cities she'd supposedly visited during her absence. Soon, they were bumping into each other at coffee shops, yoga classes, and weekend markets. Madison began mentioning Alison casually to Chelsea. "Oh, Alison said the funniest thing," or "Alison told me the story about when you two were younger." Each mention was a small incision in Chelsea's armor. Alison's strategy was surgical. She never outright revealed anything, but she left enough crumbs for Madison to follow, enough hints to make Chelsea's carefully edited history seem questionable. And Chelsea knew the danger wasn't just in what Madison might learn, it was in what she might start to imagine. Complicating matters further was Peaches. Peaches had been a disruptive force in Fairmont Crest for years, a woman whose charm was matched only by her talent for unearthing other people's weaknesses. She thrived on instability, often positioning herself in the gaps between alliances and exploiting them for her own amusement. Chelsea had kept her at arm's length, knowing that proximity to Peaches was like standing too close to an open flame. Seeing Alison with Peaches was like watching someone hand a loaded weapon to a skilled marksman. The first time Chelsea saw them together was at the Green Lantern, a dimly lit lounge known for its martinis and discreet clientele. They sat in a corner booth, heads close, laughter spilling between them in waves that seemed too rehearsed to be spontaneous. Alison caught Chelsea's eye across the room, held it for a beat too long, then raised her glass in a silent toast. The message was clear. She wasn't just back, she was building alliances. Now Chelsea found herself fighting on two fronts. In public, she had to maintain the flawless image she had spent years perfecting. In private, she had to try to anticipate Alison's next move. The problem was, Alison didn't seem to be following a predictable pattern. One day she was all warmth and nostalgia, reminiscing about shared adventures as if they were still friends. The next, she was icy and distant, leaving Chelsea to wonder if she'd imagined the friendliness altogether. Chelsea considered confronting her directly, but there was no proof of anything actionable. Alison was too smart for that. Every gift, every encounter, every pointed remark was just ambiguous enough to be defensible. If Chelsea accused her of harassment, Alison could easily turn it into a story about an old friend misreading her intentions. But Chelsea's instincts told her this wasn't random. There was intent. Purpose. And the question gnawed at her: was this about revenge for the past, or was Alison after something more tangible, something Chelsea had now, something she wasn't willing to give up? The anxiety settled into Chelsea's bones. She began noticing details she might have ignored before: the way people's conversations sometimes stopped when she entered a room, the way her name came up more often in contexts she didn't control. Even Craig, who had moved on with his own life, reached out unexpectedly one evening to ask if she'd seen Alison. His voice carried a note she couldn't quite place: concern, maybe, or something closer to warning. Chelsea started sleeping less. She found herself waking in the middle of the night, replaying every interaction with Alison, every time their eyes had met since her return. She began to suspect that Alison wasn't just playing a psychological game, she was mapping Chelsea's life, identifying the pressure points. And once she had the map, she could choose exactly where to press. If Alison had returned for a single reason, Chelsea couldn't see it yet. but the precision of her movements suggested a larger design. Maybe it wasn't just about humiliation or even power. Maybe Alison wanted to dismantle Chelsea's life piece by piece, not in a blaze of scandal, but in a slow, methodical erosion that left Chelsea with nothing and no one. The worst part was the uncertainty. Chelsea could prepare for a fight, but how did you prepare for a war when the other side refused to declare it? And as the weeks went on, one thing became increasingly clear: Alison wasn't going away this time. The evening air in Fairmont Crest had always carried a certain stillness, the kind that lulled its residents into a false sense of security. But Chelsea no longer found comfort in the quiet. Every shadow on her lawn seemed longer than it should be. Every unfamiliar car parked too long in her street became a possible sign that Alison was still close, still watching. The knowledge that her adversary could be anywhere at any time was beginning to feel like an invisible chain around her throat. Madison noticed the change before Chelsea could hide it. "You've been different lately," she said one night, her tone careful but probing. "Distracted. Guarded. Is something going on?" Chelsea forced a smile, leaning back against the sofa cushions. "Just work stress. The usual." But Madison's expression didn't soften. There was a trace of doubt there, a seed Alison had planted and was patiently watering. The transformation in Madison's demeanor was slow but undeniable. She began asking more questions about Chelsea's past, about the years before they'd met. When Chelsea deflected, Madison would nod, drop the subject for the moment, but her eyes told a different story. They weren't the eyes of someone who was satisfied with the answers she was getting. Chelsea could practically hear Alison's voice echoing in Madison's mind, weaving half-truths into tantalizing possibilities. Meanwhile, Alison's alliance with Peaches was no longer speculation, it was fact. The two were spotted together often enough to be noticed, yet never so frequently that their partnership could be dismissed as ordinary friendship. Peaches had a knack for exploiting social fault lines, and Alison had given her a new set of coordinates: Chelsea's life. The first strike from that side came during the Fairmont Women's Guild banquet. Chelsea had worked for months to make the event flawless, ensuring every table setting, every floral arrangement, every moment of the evening would reinforce her image as the Guild's indispensable leader. But just as the charity auction reached its highest bid, Peaches took the microphone under the guise of announcing a surprise donation. Instead, she offered a thinly veiled anecdote about a certain hostess who once thought loyalty was optional, her gaze flicking almost imperceptibly toward Chelsea's table. The room's polite laughter was tinged with curiosity, a spark looking for tinder. Chelsea felt her control slipping. She began to second-guess her moves, her public appearances shrinking in number. That vacuum gave Alison more room to operate. When Chelsea skipped a gallery opening she had been scheduled to attend, Alison was there in her place, stepping into the spotlight without hesitation. She didn't need to say anything about Chelsea. Her mere presence was enough to invite comparisons. Madison's interactions with Alison grew bolder. One afternoon, Chelsea returned home to find Madison already there, seated at the kitchen counter with a small, elegantly wrapped box. "From Alison," Madison said, as if it were the most natural thing in the world. Inside was a pair of pearl earring, classic, understated, beautiful. "They were her mother's," Madison added. "She thought I'd appreciate them." Chelsea's pulse quickened. This wasn't just a gift, it was a test. And Madison was waiting to see how she would react. The problem was that Chelsea didn't know how to react. Any open hostility toward Alison risked making her look unstable in Madison's eyes. But every display of tolerance gave Alison more room to maneuver. It was a no-win scenario, and Alison knew it. The tension reached a new level when Craig reappeared. His sudden visit to Chelsea's studio caught her off guard. He claimed he was in town for business, but the way he lingered, the way his gaze flicked toward the door as if expecting someone else to walk in, told a different story. "She's been in touch with me," Craig admitted finally. "Alison. She wants to talk about old times." Chelsea's breath caught. "And did you?" "Not yet," Craig said. "But I thought you should know." It was another layer to the game. Alison wasn't content to unsettle Chelsea in the present. She was pulling threads from the past, threads that might unravel more than just Chelsea's public image. Craig, for all his faults, still carried the weight of shared history with both women. If Alison convinced him to side with her, it could lend credibility to whatever story she chose to tell. The question of motive loomed larger. Was this about their affair? About the betrayal? Or was Alison aiming for something more calculated, perhaps a position within the very social hierarchy Chelsea had spent years perfecting? Alison had the charisma, the connections, and now, with Peaches, the leverage. Chelsea began keeping notes, dates, locations, gifts, interactions. She documented everything, not just to keep her mind clear, but in the faint hope that some pattern would emerge. Yet the pattern that did emerge was almost too obvious. Alison wasn't rushing toward a single moment of confrontation. She was building something slow, deliberate, almost architectural in its precision. One evening, Chelsea received an invitation. No return address, just a handwritten card. Join me for a drink. Let's see if we can remember who we used to be. It was signed simply A. Against her better judgment, Chelsea went. The meeting took place at an old rooftop bar overlooking the town. Alison was already there, a glass of red wine in hand. She greeted Chelsea with that same unnerving smile. "Relax," Alison said. "I'm not here to ruin you, at least, not tonight." They talked, or rather, Alison talked, weaving between nostalgia and accusation with disarming ease. She spoke of their past as if it were an unfinished novel, one that deserved a better ending. Chelsea listened, knowing that every word was both an invitation and a threat. Before leaving, Alison leaned in close, her voice low enough to be lost in the wind. "I'm going to take something from you," she whispered. "Not because I need it, but because you think you can't live without it. And when I do, you'll wish you'd never pretended I didn't exist." From that night on, Chelsea understood. The game wasn't about exposing a single secret. It was about control. Alison wanted to make her move in such a way that Chelsea would be forced to surrender it willingly. The days that followed brought sharper blows. Peaches hosted a private gathering, selectively inviting key figures from Fairmont Crest's upper circle. Chelsea was conspicuously left off the list. Madison, however, was invited and she went. When she returned, she spoke glowingly about Alison's charm, her stories, her refreshing honesty. "She's not what you made her out to be," Madison said. The words cut deeper than Chelsea expected. That was the moment Chelsea realized she wasn't just fighting to protect her reputation, she was fighting to keep her closest relationships intact. And she wasn't sure she was winning. The climax began to build in subtle, but undeniable ways. Anonymous tips about Chelsea's past began reaching local journalists. The details were just specific enough to be damaging, but vague enough to avoid outright libel. Chelsea suspected Alison's hand in it, but without proof, all she could do was brace for impact. Craig called again, this time with a warning. "She's not just stirring up trouble," he said. "She's after something. Something you have now." Chelsea pressed him for more, but Craig claimed he didn't know. Still, his tone suggested otherwise. Every path Chelsea took to counter Alison seemed to loop back on itself. Confronting her in public risked making her look paranoid. Ignoring her gave her more room to operate. And every day, the balance tipped a little further out of Chelsea's favor. The final turning point came at a lavish masquerade ball hosted by one of the town's wealthiest families. Chelsea arrived determined to reclaim some ground, dressed in a gown that radiated authority. But the moment she stepped into the grand hall, she saw Alison across the room, masked, but unmistakable. By her side stood Madison, laughing at something Alison had just whispered. It was in that instant Chelsea understood. The loss Alison intended to deliver wasn't an abstract blow to her reputation or a vague social demotion. It was personal, intimate. She wasn't just dismantling Chelsea's world, she was replacing her in it. Somewhere in the swirl of music and conversation, Peaches appeared, her mask glinting under the chandeliers. She caught Chelsea's eye, smiled knowingly, and then disappeared into the crowd. It was a signal, though Chelsea didn't yet know what it meant. By the end of the night, it was clear that the pieces were all in place. Alison had her alliances. She had the leverage. and she had the attention of the one person Chelsea couldn't bear to lose. The only thing left was the final move. And Alison, patient as ever, was ready to make it. The days after the masquerade felt like living in the eye of a storm. Chelsea knew the chaos wasn't over. If anything, it was about to reach its full force, but there was a deceptive calm in the air, as though Alison was savoring the moment before her final strike. Chelsea felt the trap closing, but couldn't yet see the shape of it. Madison's absence was the first sign. She stopped coming home at her usual hours, offering vague explanations about late meetings or spontaneous get-togethers with new friends. Chelsea didn't need to ask who those friends were. The once effortless warmth between them was thinning, replaced by an unspoken wariness. Madison had one foot in Chelsea's world and one foot in Alison's, and it was clear which side she found more thrilling. Then came the invitation again, handwritten and untraceable. Tonight. The Green Lantern. Come alone. Chelsea knew better than to go, but the alternative doing nothing felt worse. She arrived to find Alison already there, sipping champagne at the corner booth. No Peaches, no Madison, just Alison, her expression somewhere between satisfaction and challenge. "You've been fighting the wrong battle," Alison said without preamble. "You keep thinking this is about your reputation. It's not. That's too easy. This is about balance." She leaned forward, her voice soft. "You've taken too much space, Chelsea. I'm just making room for the rest of us." Chelsea's jaw tightened. "By destroying me?" "By showing everyone you're not untouchable," Alison replied. "And by taking what matters to you, so you understand what you've done to others." It was the closest thing to a confession Chelsea would get, but it wasn't enough to use against her. Alison had crafted this game so every move was coded in plausible deniability. The next day, the final blow landed. A series of photos began circulating in the private channels of Fairmont Crest's elite photos of Chelsea and Alison from years ago, intimate enough to spark scandal, but subtle enough to avoid outright obscenity. No context, no explanation, just the kind of suggestive imagery that could be interpreted in a dozen ways, each one eroding Chelsea's carefully constructed image. The source was anonymous, but Chelsea knew. By the time she could attempt damage control, the social current had already shifted. Invitations that had once been automatic stopped arriving. Partners she'd counted on for projects suddenly became too busy. In every room she entered, she could feel the weight of half-hidden glances. And Madison? She didn't come home that night. Chelsea's instinct was to retreat, but retreating meant surrender. Instead, she called Craig. When he arrived, she laid everything out: the gifts, the appearances, the alliance with Peaches, the slow dismantling of her life. "She won't stop," Chelsea said. "Not until she's taken everything." Craig was quiet for a long moment. "Then maybe stop playing her game." "And do what?" "Change the rules." The opportunity came sooner than she expected. A week later, Peaches hosted another gathering, this time an exclusive dinner. Chelsea managed to secure an invitation not from Peaches, but from a mutual acquaintance who hadn't yet chosen a side. When she arrived, Alison was already holding court, Madison seated beside her, laughing at something only they shared. Chelsea didn't confront her. Instead, she worked the room, deliberately engaging people Alison had been cultivating, offering them stories and insights that cast doubt on Alison's version of events without ever naming her. It was a gamble, but Chelsea understood the social economy of Fairmont Crest. Control wasn't always about being loud. Sometimes it was about being the last voice someone heard before they made a judgment. By the end of the night, she caught Alison watching her, a faint crease between her brows. It wasn't victory, but it was a crack in Alison's flawless confidence. The following days were a quiet tug-of-war. Alison pushed, Chelsea countered, not to erase the damage, but to keep it from becoming irreversible. Madison remained distant, torn between the allure of Alison's narrative and the history she had with Chelsea. The community's attention, once a tide flowing entirely in Alison's favor, began to fragment. The end came not with a dramatic confrontation, but with something simpler: fatigue. Alison, for all her precision, was relentless, and relentless games eventually exhaust everyone involved. Peaches, always chasing the next source of chaos, drifted toward other targets. Without her ally amplifying the instability, Alison's hold on the town's attention began to wane. Their last meeting was unplanned, a chance encounter at a small cafe on the edge of town. They stood there, two women who had once shared everything and now shared almost nothing. Alison smiled faintly. "You held on longer than I expected," she said. "And you took less than you thought you would," Chelsea replied. Alison tilted her head, as if considering whether to argue, then simply said, "For now." She walked away without looking back. Chelsea knew the damage would never fully vanish. Some relationships were gone for good. Madison might never return. The whispers would linger in certain corners of Fairmont Crest. But she had survived. And survival, in a place like this, was its own kind of victory. Still, she also knew Alison's words weren't idle. For now was a promise, and promises, in their history, had always been dangerous.